Hey, Leaky Brains. Okay, we're back. We're going to start some podcasting on inheritance. Okay, so we're going to talk about some basically important key terms with inheritance. So when we talk about inheritance, most people think of the word genetics, all right? The genetics of organisms and how those sort of traits, all of our traits, what we look like, how they are inherited or passed on. Okay, so when I asked a lot of kids in class, what is a gene? A lot of kids said something that can be passed on from parent to offspring. Okay, and what we need to realize here, that is true. That is what basically a lot of other students said. It's what gives us our traits, what we look like. That is also true. A gene is a coding section of DNA. So the A's, T's, G's, and C's, the order of those specific letters of the DNA, basically there are certain coding regions that code for proteins, like we've talked about, that give us the visible traits that we have. Okay, so the combination of those proteins that come from the information in the DNA, we're kind of linking it all together now. Alrighty? Now, we've got some key terms. You have to know what these key terms mean. So on basically a worksheet we did in class or whatever, alright, we used words like homozygous, heterozygous, allele, dominant, recessive, genotype, phenotype, homologous chromosomes. These are a few of the key terms you need to know about. Okay, so let's just start right here. I'll give you a simple definition, layman's terms here. Don't want to confuse you guys because I know it kind of goes right on through if we get a little bit too technical. Okay, homozygous. We need to look at the word roots. Homo. Anytime we've used that word root in class, it means same. Okay, when we talk about homozygosity, okay, we're talking about a genotype or an individual who has, for a certain trait, has the same two alleles. Tie all this together. So basically with homozygous, we're going to have a person with like big A genotype or little a genotype. So they have the same same genes, big A, or little a. They don't have two different genes because that would mean they were heterozygous. Hetero means different, basically different genes. So someone who is heterozygous would be like one big and one little. So on the worksheet we do in class, we just have a whole bunch of genotypes. It might say big A, you would have to write heterozygous. If it was big A, you would write homozygous. Little a, homozygous. Okay? What is an allele? Okay, allele basically means the different combinations of a gene. So in class we talked about Mendel, who was the father of genetics, okay, and he bred pea plants. He looked at flower color of pea plants. So he would look at like purple and white. He noticed that they had two different colors of these flowers on the pea plant, purple and white. So when we talk about allele, what Mendel was trying to say was, and the reason we coined this term is, for pea plants we have two alleles. Okay? You would have purple allele, or you would have white allele. Now what happens is when we actually look at the genetics of this, okay, there's an actual gene that codes for purple, and there's a different gene or allele of that gene. There's a gene that codes for flower color. There's one copy of that gene, which we call an allele, could be code for purple. And one allele of that gene could code for white. Okay, so there are two alleles for the gene that codes for the flower color. Okay, now, purple, Mendel noticed, would show up a little bit more often than white when he did certain crosses. And what he noticed was purple was a dominant allele. Okay? Purple allele is dominant to white allele. What that meant was, if he took a purple flower that was a purebred purple flower, okay, and he bred it with a white purebred flower, he would get all purple offspring. So the purple allele masks or covers up the white allele. Okay, so the white is recessive to the dominant purple. Okay, so dominant basically means it's the trait that will basically cover up another trait. And recessiveness means that it is basically the recessive gene. It is the gene that basically will only be exposed or will only show up if there is no purple present. Okay? So basically, if we're talking genotypes here, so if we're talking homozygous, heterozygous here, a dominant trait could be big A, 2 copies of the dominant gene. That would make it a purple flower. Or big A, little a. Having 1 copy of that dominant allele still makes it a purple flower. Okay, even though it has 1 copy of the white allele also, the little a, it's still a purple flower because it has 1 copy of the dominant gene. Okay. Recessive, the only genotype we use here would be a homozygous recessive, what we call homozygous recessive. Okay, so the white flower has to be little a, little a. Okay, so we have dominance and recessiveness. Okay, genotype. Okay, these are the actual genes that we see for a person. So this is like the big A, or the big A, or the little a, little a. It's the actual set of genes that the person has that code for a trait. The actual genes that we see. Okay? Now, a lot of times we don't know the genotype because the genotype's not visible. Okay? We can't actually look at the person and say, oh, I know what your genes are. Okay? So sometimes we have to do some tests to find out the genotypes. But that's what genotype means. The phenotype, however, is the physical visible. I'll just put the word visible here. It is what we actually see. I have bald phenotype. Okay? I have short guy phenotype. All right? Now, one of my phenotypes is kind of chubby, but I don't necessarily have to have the genes for that. It's just because I eat too much, and I may not exercise enough. Okay? So some of my phenotypes, the visible traits, come from the genes I have, but some of those traits might just be what I look like because of how my environment is. Okay? But the phenotype is the actual visible trait. Do I have red hair? Okay? Do I have no hair? Am I short? Am I tall? Okay? So phenotype is the visible trait. Homologous chromosomes. Okay? We're going to talk about that here in a second. We'll talk about this separate. Alright? So I'm going to talk about this word homologous chromosomes as its own short podcast. And we'll talk about words like allele, dominant, recessive, kind of all of this stuff tied together with the homologous chromosomes. Alright, so it will be a separate one. Okay, so hopefully we tied in some loose ends here with what some of these words mean. So on the first assignment that we kind of did, we just basically dealt with those simple terms. Okay? Later.